Hello everyone and welcome back to the Little Quilter. Today we're going to be finishing up the Harry Potter quilt. So we've got to do all of these star blocks and then we're going to lay that out hopefully and cut the borders and piece those on so that this quilt top is finished. So we've got a lot to do. I did get my fabric in for the background fabric and have already got that cut up. I have not cut the borders because I want to see what the final layout looks like and the final size of the quilt. So we'll be waiting to cut that fabric until later. And then as always, we are using this Little Forest Quilt pattern, and this is available from shabbyfabrics.com, and they actually have quilt kits. So if you like this really beautiful design and you want to make this quilt yourself, you can certainly buy the fabric kit. If you just want to make a similar design quilt, then I would recommend buying this booklet or the online version of it in order to get the dimensions that you need to make this quilt. It's really making a beautiful quilt, and I think even if you had the dimensions just to do these blocks, no stars in there, I think that would look really beautiful, especially if you had like a really floral pattern. It would almost give it like a picket fence type vibe. So I always think it's important to not only utilize the patterns that you have, but think about them in a different way so that you can expand upon your quilt patterns that you have at home and not just use them for the one quilt they were designed for and move on. There are multiple ways to use this, and this is a beautiful quilt as it is. I think it's going to be a really fun Harry Potter quilt. So, like I said, we're going to be doing 4 at a time flying geese to make the points of our stars. So let's jump into that. Okay, everybody, I've got all of my fabric sewn on here. So to do my 4 at a time flying geese for the star block. And so now I'm just going to go through, cut these in half, and then we're basically going to do the same thing, but with one on each end. So let's jump into that. Okay, everybody, I've got all of my points done. Here's a large stack of them. And so now I'm ready to set out my star block. Now, the one thing that I am doing that's a little bit different is I am using these as my corner blocks. Now, I have got it all drawn out in this little book because I wanted for my spacing and everything to be consistent, or I just didn't want things to end up being one on top of the other. So that gave me, once I drew it out, I knew how many pieces I needed to cut for each square, and now I'm going to be using that to make sure that I'm matching my blocks to the right way. So let's get to doing that. Hey, Mom. That was a lot of pinning, but now all 15 blocks are pinned on both sides, which means that I can just chain piece this or chain sew it, whatever you want to call it, for all of them straight up and then straight back down, which is really cool. And hopefully I don't poke myself too many times. The only downside to pins, the poking. It's not a question of if I'm going to poke myself, but when I'm going to poke myself. So let's see when that happens. I have got them all done. So this is one of the star blocks, which I know for this one, there's not a great contrast here, but that is the Quidditch block, which I just loved the fabric for that one. And then let's see, I'll show you some of the other blocks that we've got here. This is one that's just got the Hogwarts on it, and that one turned out really nicely. This is my favorite fabric for this entire quilt, and it's the stained glass windows. I love that design. I think they're just really so beautiful. It's a pretty busy block, in all honesty, because of all the colors, but I think it's just going to give a nice pop to the quilt. And then we have got the last block, which is the Chocolate Frogs block. Again, not a huge contrast, but I think that it's all going to work out. I hope it's all going to work out. And now that we've got all of these blocks sewn, we're ready to lay it out and see what it'll look like put all together. And then the next step will be doing the borders. So I'm excited to see what this looks like. I hope these work well together. Okay, so I do find it a little interesting that with this block, these, there we go. That colored block right there was supposed to be more like a star pattern from the original design, but I guess because of the color choices that I've chosen for these blocks, I feel like they ended up looking almost more like X's than they really do look like stars, which is not a bad thing, but it's just from a design standpoint of they definitely look a little more like X's than stars. I still think that it's turning out pretty interesting. It is a very colorful and very patterned quilt. It is a very colorful and patterned quilt, and I think that just comes from some of it being the design choice that I've done, but also some of it just being the patterned paper or the patterned fabric that you get. So I feel like when you get these really trademark super fabrics, which I guess is maybe why most people do square block quilts, but I'm hoping that once I get the borders on, it's going to give it a little bit more, I don't know, it's going to finish it a little bit more. I still think it just looks incomplete. So I've got to get all of these sewn together though, and then I can work on the borders. All right, so I have got two of the rows together, and I'm doing this in the webbing technique to do the entire quilt. So I've got my stack of blocks over here, and I'm going to be going one at a time down it, and then hopefully that will keep everything in line, and then I can go through and iron it, which honestly is the worst part of the webbing technique, is just having such a large space and having to iron it all. So I think I'm going to try and iron it over on the larger ironing mat when I get to that point, but I've got to get the rest of these sewn on. And just to show you, so far I think it's turning out pretty cool. That looks good. So let's get the rest of these done. All right, everybody, I have finished at least the quilt top portion. So now I've got to do the borders, and I have two borders that I want to do. So I want to do a smaller border around this initial one, and then I want to do a second larger border. And let me grab those and I'll show you what they look like. Okay, so since I've got the quilt top finished, the border fabric that I want to use is this fabric right here. So this, and my goal is to make it so that it is this length wide, so that you have this nice little strip. So I'm going to cut a little bit out, 1/4 of an inch, so that we actually get this strip running along the whole quilt, so you get to see these, because I think out of all of the fabric on this quilt, this is my favorite, and so I just want to kind of have a little spot to showcase it. And I also think it'll just be a really fun little border, a really nice pop of color, and I mean it's so pretty. How could you not use it, right? So then what I'm going to be using is the Marauders map. So this is the rest of the fabric I bought, which I might have bought a little too much. Maybe did my calculations wrong. I don't know. I always do that. Whenever I purchase fabric, I always end up purchasing too much fabric. It's a problem. And I either over calculate or I like totally under calculate. I don't know. Either way, I just end up with too much. So I have this quite a bit, but I think it'll work well because I'm still going to need extra. So since I do it on my long arm quilt, even though I'm going to do and here's what I'm going to do. Sorry, jumping around a little bit. So what I decided to do for my border, and this is how I knew how big of a border I wanted to do, is I got the Urban Elements. Let's see here if you can see it. The Urban Elements Along Came a Spider. So my goal is not to do like, multiples. I just want to do one, maybe two. I think it says it's a 5-inch wide double row pattern. So I haven't done a ton of, well, I haven't done any pantographs, to be honest. So I am a little bit excited about doing this, but here's kind of what it looks like when you roll it out. And so I'll have to set up my long arm. I have to put on all the stuff for it, but this is what I am planning on doing for that for the border around it. And so that's why I was actually waiting for this to come in to see actually how wide that pattern was. So I'll do at least a 5-inch border, but I've got to give myself a little bit more gap than that actually, because I like to have a little bit of extra on the quilt, so whenever I go through I can square it up and cut it up and everything so that it's nice and perfect. But I've got plenty of fabric to do that. So I'm going to get to ironing all this fabric and cutting it up so that we can get this on this quilt. And then, oh my gosh, it'll be done. How exciting is that? I can't believe it's come together so quickly. Okay, let's do it. Okay, you guys, I have done the first border and I love it so much. I feel like this fabric was made for borders. So let me show you. Okay, so here's the border, and one of the things that I did, here's a part where you can see where I've switched, where the fabric ended and I had to get another strip, and I did a straight stitch. So normally when I do borders, I actually do a diagonal, like a mitered corner whenever I'm doing them. But in this case, because this is such a, you know, one on top of the other row, I wanted to keep with doing that straight stitch there so that it wasn't as noticeable. I mean, I think if you look around you can probably find them, but it's not terribly noticeable. And then I got lucky in some places, like here, this was not planned, but it looks like it really just kind of keeps on going like it's supposed to. So I love how this looks. I did struggle a little bit with whether to have the top one, which direction to have it going in, and I just decided to kind of keep it flowing in the direction that it's going in. And then the other thing was, the other reason I did that was because on both sides they're both going up. So this is a directional quilt, and that most of my fabric, if it has a direction, I've tried to keep it. So like the chocolate frogs are up so you can read chocolate frogs. Now the star points are definitely all over the place, but this is in the direction. The same thing for like this fabric here. I tried to keep it nice and directional so that we had, you know, this point here. And so that we had the castle in the right direction and the Hogwarts symbol in the right direction. So some of it is not as important. You know, the Quidditch fabric, I don't think it was as important, but I did try and keep it in a similar direction so that the words were sort of going in the right direction to an extent. So my daughter's been playing with bobbins. What I decided to do with the border is to keep this horizontal fabric across the top, and that's where I'm going to join those two. And then what I thought would be best was to actually do this so that the fabric ran vertical like this. So you get the whole length of it. Now it is repetitive obviously, but you get that whole length. So what I did was roll out an entire length and then I've cut it so that it fits. So I've ended up with this super long piece, and I think that this one piece will go ahead and span the entire length of the quilt, so we should have enough. Okay, so I have got the edges on both sides, and I went with that full length of fabric there. And so then what I decided to do to keep it consistent, because I thought this main sort of Marauders map, I wanted to have that consistent. So I went through and I cut another line so that it would include as much of that main tail. And so what I'm going to do is line this up here so that we're almost right in line. Now, I don't know if it's going to end up the same on the other end down there, but one side looking cool will be nice. So we're going to sew this, and I've only got one other side to do, and then this quilt top's going to be done, so that's cool. So it's finally done, and the quilt top is finished. Now, obviously, I still have to quilt it, and if you guys have stuck with me this far, I hope that you enjoyed watching me put this quilt together. I hope even more that my niece is going to love this quilt. Now, I do have a question for you guys if you've made it this far. I am thinking of doing pantograph quilting on this because I think I'm hoping that it's going to be a little bit faster than custom quilting it. And since it's for a young kid, I just don't think they're going to be super impressed by like quilting designs or really detailed quilting. And I want it to be very light for them as well. So I have two pantographs here. Let me see. Black Magic is this one, and I bought both of these from I bought both of them from Urban Elements. And so Black Magic, it has some cats, broomsticks, and then hearts and the stars. Or hearts, not hearts, hats and stars. So I thought that was kind of cool, kind of like the sorting hat, and then of course with the broom, and then Crookshanks, the cat. So I really kind of like that one, I think, the most. The other one that I have here is Witch, again by Urban Elements. And so it is basically the hat, so the witch hat, and then the five-pointed star. So if you guys want to leave in the comment section down below which one you think. I'm going to also ask my sister just to get her opinion on this. And then my border design is going to be those spiders to be like Hagrid's pet spider that saves Harry. So again, I hope you enjoyed the quilt, and the pattern design that this quilt is done by is the Little Forest Quilt from shabbyfabrics.com. So I think this is a great type of quilt design for something that you want, like if you want a really large block like these, to show off that fabric, and then using the sort of smaller print fabrics to do these little pieces here. So that's all I've got for this time around, and I hope that you guys have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next time.